The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, a sterile counterpoint to the hushed whispers that rippled through the packed gallery. Mia Adams sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. The navy blue dress she wore, a stark contrast to the olive drab that had been her uniform for so long, felt constricting of foreign skin. Whitaker, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the artificial light, stood confidently in the witness box. He exuded an air of practiced ease, the kind of self-assurance that came from years of unquestioned authority. Mia watched him, her gaze steady, unblinking, a silent predator assessing its prey. The courtroom felt too small, the air thick with anticipation, a pressure cooker about to blow. She could almost taste the metallic tang of anxiety on the air, a stark reminder of the stakes. Freedom or confinement, truth or fabrication. Her life distilled into this single, suffocating moment. On the night in question, Whitaker began, his voice resonating with practiced authority, each word carefully measured. I initiated a routine traffic stop. He paused, allowing the weight of his statement to settle in the courtroom. Mia esse jotaiten imperceptibili. Routine. That was the word he chose. Routine, as if the casual violation of her rights, the unwarranted aggression, the casual disregard for her dignity, were all somehow ordinary. A flicker of something cold and hard, something forged in the crucible of war, ignited in her gut. She had faced down enemy fire, stared into the abyss of death itself. And yet, this felt different. This was a betrayal of a different kind, a violation of the very principle she had sworn to uphold. He continued, his narrative flowing smoothly, a well-rehearsed lie. She was swerving between lanes. Mia's mind flashed back to that night. The rain-slicked streets, the exhaustion pulling at her, the phantom ache in her shoulder, a legacy of a mission gone wrong. Swerving? Perhaps. She had been tired, bone-tired, but not impaired. Certainly not enough to warrant what followed. The memory of the flashing lights in her rearview mirror, the sudden surge of adrenaline, the instinctive tightening of her muscles, it was all so vivid, so raw. She could still feel the phantom pressure of his hand on her arm, the bruising grip, the way he had yanked her from the car. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, a silent prayer for control, for the strength to maintain the composed facade she had so carefully constructed. Immediately hostile, Whitaker's voice droned on, painting a picture of a belligerent, uncooperative suspect. Mia's fingers tightened around the small, worn silver cross she held concealed in her palm. Hostile? She had been wary, yes. Cautious. But hostile? Never. Years of training had ingrained in her the importance of control, of maintaining a cool head under pressure. She had asked questions, demanded clarification, asserted her rights. Was that hostility, or simply a refusal to be bullied? The courtroom seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in, the air growing thin. She could feel the weight of the gazes upon her, the silent judgment, the unspoken accusations. It took every ounce of her willpower to remain still, to maintain the mask of detached composure. Refused to provide her license, the lie hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mia's breath hitched in her throat. This was the crux of it, the foundation of his fabricated narrative. She had given him her license. She remembered it clearly, the crisp feel of the plastic card in her hand, the way she had held it out to him, her movements precise, deliberate. He had snatched it from her, his fingers brushing against hers, a fleeting, unwelcome contact. The memory sent a shiver down her spine, a visceral reaction she couldn't quite suppress. Why? Why construct this elaborate lie? What was he so afraid of? The question gnawed at her, a persistent, unsettling undercurrent to the proceedings. She glanced at her lawyer, Olivia Grant. Olivia sat beside her, a picture of serene confidence, her expression unreadable. Their earlier conversations echoed in Mia's mind, the carefully crafted strategy, the meticulously planned execution. Patience, Olivia had advised. Let him build his castle of lies. We'll tear it down, brick by brick. Mia took a slow, measure breath, clinging to Olivia's words like a lifeline. Patience. She had to trust the process, trust Olivia's judgment. She had to wait for the right moment, the opportune time to shatter the illusion Whitaker had so painstakingly constructed. The courtroom buzzed with a low, almost palpable tension. The judge, Leonard Reeves, observed the proceedings with an impassive gaze, his face a mask of judicial neutrality. His silence was more potent than any gavel, holding the room in its grip. Mia could feel the weight of his scrutiny, the unspoken demand for truth. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength, steeling herself for what was to come. The truth. It was a weapon, sharp and double-edged, and she was ready to wield it. The courtroom air, thick with anticipation, crackled with unspoken tension. Officer Daniel Whitaker, his chest puffed out like a preening bird, stood firm in the witness box. His voice, resonant and confident, echoed through the silent chamber as he recounted his version of the arrest. He painted a picture of a belligerent Mia Adams, resisting arrest, a danger to society. Each carefully chosen word, each practiced gesture was designed to bolster his narrative, to solidify the image of his own righteousness. He felt the familiar thrill of control, the satisfaction of wielding power. This woman, this defiant Mia Adams, would learn her lesson. The system would not fail him. He glanced at her, expecting to see fear, perhaps a flicker of regret. Instead, he was met with an unnerving calmness, an almost imperceptible tilt of her head, a subtle shift in her posture that sent a prickle of unease down his spine. Mia sat motionless, her expression unreadable. The officer's words washed over her, a distorted echo of the truth. She felt a cold anger simmering beneath her composed exterior, a tightly coiled spring of fury. This charade, this blatant perversion of justice, fueled a resolve within her. She knew the cost of silence, the insidious nature of unchecked power. She had witnessed it firsthand in far more dangerous theaters than this sterile courtroom. Her training, years spent honing her instincts in the crucible of combat, kept her grounded. Patience, Mia. Patience. Let him build his castle of lies. It would crumble soon enough. She focused on the rhythmic tapping of Olivia Grant's pen against her legal pad, a small, steady beat in the cacophony of Whitaker's testimony. It was a silent promise, a reassurance. Olivia Grant, Mia's lawyer, watched the proceedings unfold with the detached air of a surgeon observing a complex operation. Whitaker's performance was almost theatrical, a carefully constructed facade designed to sway the jury. She had seen it countless times before the practiced confidence, the subtle manipulation of language. But beneath the surface, she sensed a fragility, a crack in the officer's carefully constructed armor. She allowed him to continue, letting him weave his web of deceit, each thread a potential weapon in her arsenal. Her silence was a calculated strategy, a way to lull him into a false sense of security. The judge, Leonard Reeves, a man known for his impartiality and sharp intellect, observed the proceedings with an unwavering gaze. His expression betrayed nothing, his silence a heavy blanket over the courtroom. He was a man of process, a guardian of justice, and he would wait for the scales to tip. Officer Whitaker, Olivia's voice, crisp and clear, cut through the courtroom silence. You stated that Miss Adams refused to provide her license and that you feared for your safety. Are you absolutely certain that's what happened? Her tone was deceptively mild, belying the sharp edge of her words. Whitaker bristled, the question striking a discordant note in his carefully orchestrated narrative. He hadn't expected such a direct challenge so early in the cross-examination. His internal monologue spiraled. What did she mean? Did she have something? No, impossible. He made sure of it. I'm certain, counselor, he replied, his voice a fraction too high, a tremor of unease creeping into his demeanor. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, a dull counterpoint to the rapid thud of Mia's heart against her ribs. She watched Whitaker, his earlier swagger now replaced by a rigid stillness, his eyes fixed on the screen where the body cam footage played. Each pixel was a nail hammered into the coffin of his lies. He thought he could bury the truth. She thought, a flicker of grim satisfaction rising within her. He underestimated me. The grainy footage flickered to life, the world seen through the distorted lens of the camera strapped to Whitaker's chest. The shaky image focused on her car, pulled over by the side of the road. Her hands were visible, gripping the steering wheel, her expression calm, almost eerily so, given the circumstances. A faint scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, the lingering aroma of the courthouse, seemed to thicken the air around Mia, a stark contrast to the crisp night air captured on the recording. She could almost taste the metallic tang of adrenaline that had coated her tongue that night, the fight-or-flight response simmering just beneath the surface. Whitaker's voice, tinny and distorted through the camera's speaker, filled the courtroom. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." The command, though seemingly routine, held an undercurrent of aggression, a subtle edge that grated on Mia's nerves even now. On the screen, her digital self exited the car, her movements precise and controlled, years of disciplined training ingrained into her very being. She remembered the chilling premonition that had prickled her skin that night, a sense of being hunted, of being unjustly targeted. The courtroom held its breath, the silence punctuated only by the whirring of the projector. Whitaker shifted uneasily in the witness stand, his gaze darting between the judge, the jury, and the damning footage. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, catching the light like a tiny, trembling diamond. "He's starting to crack," Olivia observed, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. She had laid the trap carefully, letting Whitaker build his own gallows with his arrogance. The audio crackled as Whitaker approached her on the recording. License and registration. His hand, visible in the lower corner of the frame, hovered near his holstered weapon. The seemingly innocuous gesture sent a wave of unease rippling through the courtroom. Olivia's voice, crisp and controlled, cut through the silence. "Officer Whitaker, you testified that Ms. Adams resisted arrest. Can you point out the part where that happened?" Whitaker's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes fixated on the screen as if searching for an escape route within the pixels. She was uncooperative, he stammered, his voice losing its earlier confidence. He felt the weight of the jury's gaze, 12 pairs of eyes boring into him, dissecting his every word, every micro-expression. "They know," he realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach. "They all know I'm lying." The footage continued, showing Mia calmly asking why she was being pulled over. Whitaker's response was inaudible, lost in a burst of static, but his body language spoke volumes. His shoulders were tense, his stance aggressive, the subtle shift in his weight betraying his readiness to escalate the situation. Olivia stepped closer to the screen, her finger pointing to Mia's image. "The footage clearly shows Ms. Adams complying with your requests. Where is the resistance?" Her voice, though quiet, resonated with an undeniable authority. The air in the courtroom crackled with tension, the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the silence. Whitaker's face paled, the blood draining from his cheeks, leaving him a ghastly shade of gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled gasp escaped. The jury's expressions shifted from curiosity to skepticism, then to open disbelief. He could feel the walls closing in, the weight of his perjury crushing him. Olivia turned to face the judge, her expression impassive. "Your Honor, I request that the court consider this blatant act of perjury and the evident abuse of power displayed by Officer Whitaker." Judge Reeves, his face etched with disapproval, nodded curtly. "Officer Whitaker," he said, his voice laced with steel, "you are under oath. I advise you to reconsider your testimony." The courtroom held its breath. The silence stretched, taut as a wire, before Mia finally spoke, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Your Honor," she said, her gaze meeting the judge's directly, "I am Lieutenant Commander Mia Adams of the United States Navy SEALs. I am trained to handle high-stress situations, to remain calm under pressure, and to follow orders. Resisting arrest is not in my nature." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The jury gasped, their whispers rippling through the courtroom. Whitaker's eyes widened in disbelief, the realization of his colossal misjudgment dawning upon him. He had targeted a decorated Navy SEAL, a woman whose training and discipline far surpassed his own. He had built his lies on a foundation of arrogance and prejudice, and now the structure was crumbling around him, burying him beneath the weight of his own deceit. The power dynamic shifted, the scales of justice tipping irrevocably in Mia's favor. The courtroom, once a stage for his performance, had become his prison. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, a dull, insistent drone that resonated with the tension in Mia's chest. Whitaker, still on the stand, exuded a dwindling confidence. His earlier swagger had been replaced by a nervous shifting, a subtle tremor in his hands as he gripped the edges of the witness box. He'd painted a vivid picture of a belligerent Mia, a woman resisting arrest, forcing him to escalate the situation. A fabrication meticulously crafted to protect his own image. Mia watched him, her expression unreadable, a mask honed over years of operating in high-stakes environments. Inside, though, a storm raged. Anger, cold and sharp, warred with a weary resignation. This charade, this perversion of justice, was precisely why she'd avoided the spotlight for so long. Olivia Grant, Mia's lawyer, moved with a quiet grace, a predator circling its prey. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, never left Whitaker's face. A single strand of auburn hair had escaped her otherwise impeccable bun, and it danced around her cheek as she paced. She held a remote, her thumb hovering over the play button. Mia knew what it contained. The truth. Her truth. And with every breath she drew, the anticipation thrummed through her veins. The courtroom air crackled with unspoken words, with the weight of the impending revelation. So, Officer Whitaker, Olivia's voice cut through the silence, smooth as polished steel. You're telling this court that Ms. Adams was resisting you feared for your safety, yet everything we just saw. She pressed play, the courtroom screen flickering to life, displaying the grainy footage from Whitaker's body cam, tells a very different story. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The body cam footage played, a stark contrast to Whitaker's embellished narrative. It showed Mia, compliant, hands raised, her voice calm and measured. It showed Whitaker's escalating aggression, his verbal taunts, his disproportionate use of force. Each frame was a nail in his coffin, hammered home by the stark reality captured by the lens. Whitaker's face paled, a sickly sheen of sweat coating his brow. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his eyes darting between the judge, the jury, and the damning footage playing on the screen. His carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the fear beneath. He'd underestimated Mia, underestimated Olivia, and now he was paying the price. His internal monologue, once a stream of self-justification, now spiraled into a frantic scramble for an escape route. He could feel the weight of the jury's gazes, the palpable shift in the atmosphere. The courtroom had become a pressure cooker, and he was the one about to boil. Olivia paused the recording. The sudden silence amplified the tension, every rustle of clothing, every cough echoing through the room. She turned to face the jury, her expression somber. "Members of the jury," she began, her voice low and resonant. "You have seen the evidence. You have heard Officer Whitaker's testimony, and you have witnessed the stark discrepancy between the two. I ask you, what other conclusion can be drawn but that Officer Whitaker not only abused his power, but also committed perjury before this court?" Judge Leonard Reeves, a man known for his impartiality and unwavering commitment to justice, watched the proceedings with a hawk-like gaze. His silence was more potent than any outburst. He'd seen enough cases like this to recognize the pattern, the subtle manipulations, the casual disregard for the truth. He waited, letting the weight of the evidence settle upon the jury, letting the silence speak volumes. Mia felt a strange sense of detachment, as if observing the scene from a distance. The anger remained, a simmering ember beneath the surface, but it was overlaid with a profound weariness. This wasn't the battle she'd envisioned fighting after leaving the Navy. Yet, here she was in a different kind of war zone, fighting for her reputation, for her very dignity. "Ms. Adams," Olivia turned to her voice gentle yet firm. "Would you please tell the court about your background, your experience in handling high-pressure situations?" Mia drew a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, stealing her resolve. This was it, the moment of truth. "I've spent my entire career making split-second decisions," she began, her voice steady and clear, "not in a courtroom, but in actual combat zones. I served as a lieutenant commander in the Navy SEALs for 10 years, leading missions where lives hung in the balance." The words hung in the air, reverberating through the stunned silence. The revelation landed like a bombshell, shattering the carefully constructed narrative Whitaker had presented. The jury, the judge, even Olivia, stared at Mia with a mixture of disbelief and awe. The courtroom, once filled with whispers and murmurs, was now utterly silent. Whitaker's face, already pale, turned ashen. His eyes, wide with panic, darted around the room, searching for an escape, finding none. He'd tangled with the wrong woman. He'd underestimated her strength, her resilience, her unwavering commitment to truth and justice. He thought he could bury her beneath his lies, but instead, he'd unearthed a force he couldn't control. The shift in power was palpable. The air crackled with a different kind of energy, no longer the tense anticipation of verdict, but the heavy realization of exposed deceit. Mia, once the accused, now stood as a figure of quiet authority, her composure a stark contrast to Whitaker's unraveling demeanor. The courtroom had become her domain, and the silence, once a weapon used against her, now amplified her strength. She looked at Whitaker, her gaze unwavering, and in that moment, he knew he was utterly defeated. He not only lost the case, but he'd lost something far more valuable: his credibility, his reputation, his very identity as an officer of the law. The silence stretched, broken only by the quiet click of Judge Reeves' gavel. The sound, sharp and decisive, signaled the end of Whitaker's charade, the beginning of Mia's vindication. The air in the courtroom, thick with unspoken tensions, crackled with anticipation. Judge Reeves, a man whose face seemed carved from granite, surveyed the scene. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, rested momentarily on Whitaker, then shifted to Mia. The silence stretched, each tick of the clock echoing the weight of the impending judgment. Mia sat there, silent, watching, waiting. Her hands, clasped loosely in her lap, were steady, belying the storm of emotions churning within. Each breath was a conscious effort, a practice in control honed over years of service. Control, she told herself, control is everything. She faced down worse than a lying cop. This courtroom, this trial, was just another battlefield, one where silence was her weapon of choice. Whitaker, on the other hand, fidgeted. The bravado he displayed earlier had crumbled, replaced by a sheen of sweat on his brow and a nervous twitch in his left eye. He could feel the weight of the judge's gaze, the silent accusation in the air. His carefully constructed narrative was unraveling, thread by thread, and a cold dread began to seep into his bones. He hadn't anticipated this. He hadn't anticipated her. Judge Reeves cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tense silence like a gavel. "Officer Whitaker," he began, his voice devoid of emotion, "having reviewed the evidence presented, including the body camera footage, I have no choice but to refer your statements for perjury review." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The blood drained from Whitaker's face, leaving him ashen. His mind reeled, struggling to grasp the implications. Perjury. His career, his reputation, everything he'd worked for, collapsing around him. No, he thought desperately, this can't be happening. He opened his mouth to speak, to protest, but no sound came out. His throat was constricted, his voice trapped in the rising tide of panic. He looked pleadingly at the judge, then at the jury, but their faces were impassive, offering no solace. Olivia Grant, Mia's lawyer, stood, her presence radiating quiet confidence. She addressed the court, her voice clear and resonant. "This isn't just about one officer making a mistake, Your Honor," she stated, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, holding the attention of every person present. "This is about what happens when power is abused, when those sworn to protect and serve choose instead to intimidate and lie." Each word was precise, deliberate, landing with the force of a well-aimed blow. Olivia had played her hand masterfully, allowing Whitaker's arrogance to be his own undoing. She'd known, from the moment she met Mia, that there was more to this case than met the eye. The quiet strength in Mia's eyes, the controlled fury beneath her composed exterior, had hinted at a deeper story. And now, that story was being told, not through shouts and accusations, but through the cold, hard evidence of truth. Inside, Olivia felt a surge of something akin to triumph, not just for winning the case, but for exposing the rot within the system. This was why she became a lawyer, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Mia watched Whitaker's descent into despair, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction crossing her face. It was fleeting, quickly replaced by the familiar mask of composure. This wasn't about revenge, she reminded herself. This was about justice. This was about holding those in power accountable. When the judge offered her the opportunity to speak, Mia rose, her movements deliberate and graceful. She stood before the court, a figure of quiet strength and dignity. The courtroom fell silent, anticipating her words. "Power isn't about a uniform," she began, her voice steady and clear, resonating with an unexpected authority. The silence in the courtroom deepened, every eye fixed on her. "It's about truth." The words, simple yet profound, hung in the air, echoing the sentiment of countless individuals silenced by those who wielded power unjustly. The judge leaned forward, captivated by her unexpected presence. The jury, initially skeptical, now watched her with a newfound respect. Even Whitaker, lost in his own despair, couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. "For years," Mia continued, her voice gaining strength, "I have served this country, upholding the very principles of truth and justice that Officer Whitaker so blatantly disregarded." With each word, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The initial tension gave way to a sense of anticipation, a collective holding of breath. This wasn't just a defendant speaking. This was a warrior revealing her scars. "I am a Navy SEAL, trained to protect and defend, to uphold the highest standards of integrity." The revelation rippled through the room, a wave of murmurs and gasps breaking the silence. Judge Reeves straightened, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. The jury exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from indifference to awe. Whitaker stared at Mia, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the image he had constructed in his head. The defiant, uncooperative suspect was now a decorated war hero, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to his own exposed shame. A SEAL, he thought, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "I arrested a SEAL." The irony was bitter, a testament to his own blinded arrogance. Mia's gaze swept across the courtroom, meeting the eyes of each juror, each spectator, her silence speaking volumes. "I stand before you today, not just as Mia Adams, the defendant, but as a representative of all those who have been silenced, intimidated, and wronged by those who abuse their authority." Her voice resonated with conviction, echoing the unspoken cries of countless others. The weight of her words settled heavily in the courtroom, a palpable reminder of the broader implications of this case. It was no longer just about a traffic stop, a resisted arrest. It was about the erosion of trust, the betrayal of public faith. The judge cleared his throat, his voice regaining its usual composure. "Ms. Adams," he acknowledged, his tone laced with a newfound respect, "your service to this country is commendable, and it is precisely because of individuals like you, who uphold the principles of truth and justice, that this court must take such matters seriously." His words were not just directed at Mia, but at everyone present, a reaffirmation of the court's commitment to upholding the law. The weight of his pronouncements resonated through the room, underlining the gravity of the situation and offering a glimmer of hope in the face of injustice. As Mia returned to her seat, a sense of quiet strength emanated from her. She had spoken her truth, and in doing so, had not only secured her own freedom, but had also become a voice for those who had been silenced. The courtroom, once a place of accusation and judgment, now felt like a sanctuary, a space where justice, however delayed, had finally been served. Whitaker, his career in ruins, his reputation tarnished, remained seated, his gaze fixed on the floor, the embodiment of exposed guilt and the bitter consequence of abused power. The silence that followed was no longer tense, but heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, a testament to the power of one voice to challenge the system and expose the darkness within. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a silence that promised change.